All right, so there is a huge problem within the church. The problem is that huge numbers of young people are walking away from the faith. Once they enter college or university or even before, okay? The problem has led me to believe that parents, like many of you, youth pastors, Christian school teachers have, or anyone who has an impact on our youth, have the most important job in all of Christendom. I hope I'm preaching to the choir here, but in case you don't agree, I want to give you some statistics that might change your mind. Just how serious is the problem? Well, I want you to imagine 4 Christian young people. Just imagine 4 Christian young people. Maybe they go to our church. Maybe they're your kids, okay? Just imagine 4 Christian young people that currently attend the church. The best statistics tell us that 3 out of the 4 will walk away from the faith by the time they enter college, university. Those are the best statistics. 3 out of 4. Some of you are not strong in math. That's 75%, okay? 75%. I know what you're thinking. Come on, Tim. You don't even know the Christian students I was thinking about. They go to church every week. They're raised in a good Christian home. The best research studies show that regular church attendance actually had little effect on the statistics. In fact, some studies show that it was even worse for kids that attend church regularly, okay? Now, I have my own theory about that. I think that maybe those kids are going to churches where they're not fed properly, okay? And so they think they know it all, and then they reach university, and then they're gone, okay? Now, these statistics should be alarming to all of us. It's simply unacceptable. You don't have to take my word for it. There have been just numerous amount of books written about this topic. Research studies have been done, so we can find out what's going on. So let's follow, what follows is the conclusion of some of those studies. So let's look at some of them. Maybe you've heard of the Barnett Research Group. The Barnett Research Group. Well, in 2006, they surveyed 20-somethings, okay, the 20-year-olds, and found that the majority of 20-somethings, they found 61% of today's young adults had been churched at one point during their teen years, but are now spiritually disengaged. That's Barnett Research Group. Lifeway research, okay? So maybe you've heard of Lifeway. Well, Lifeway research found that 70% will leave the faith in college, with 30% eventually returning. 30% eventually returning. That's 7 in 10 Protestants aged 18 to 30, both evangelical and mainline, who went to church regularly in high school, said they quit attending by age 23. Age 23, so right near the end of college. There was a book called You Lost Me. You Lost Me. And it was written by David Kinnaman. This was 2011, so it's getting a little bit closer to where we are today. He found that nearly 3 out of 5 young people disconnect from their churches by the age of 15. 15. So it's not just we're losing them in college, they're actually disengaging from the church even before then. The Fuller Youth Institute, they found that 40 to 50% of students in youth groups struggle with their faith after graduation. So you see the numbers are this is how statistics go. And they're going to be a little bit here and a little bit there. So this is the lowest statistic you'll find, is 40 to 50%. Now on the very high end, and there are a couple on the high end, there's one called the Present Future. This was a study done. They found that 90% of youth who were active in high school church programs dropped out of church by the time they were sophomores in college. That's second-year university, okay? So this is on the high end. So we looked at 40 to 50%, 90%. Ken Ham and Britt Beamer, they put out their own study, okay? And they found, just to see, okay, when are these kids disengaging? And what they found was that church youth were already lost or already gone in their hearts and minds in elementary school, middle school, and high school. Not in college, which is what most people were saying. It's college. That's when it's happening. But they found even before. Now, here's probably the most important study that was done. This is called Soul Searching. This was put out by Oxford University Press, okay? So this is not a lightweight publishing company. Oxford University Press, 2005. They found that students leave the faith behind primarily because of intellectual doubt and skepticism. Intellectual doubt and skepticism. When they asked the open-ended question to 20-somethings and 30-somethings, they said, why did you fall away from the faith in which you were raised? That was the question in the book. Why did you fall away from the faith in which you were raised? It wasn't a multiple choice response. They actually gave their responses, and here were some of them. The majority response, intellectual skepticism. They said things like this. It didn't make any sense anymore. They said, some stuff is too far-fetched for me to believe. Speaking of like stories in the Bible. I think scientifically, and there's no real proof. They said things like, there's too many questions that can't be answered. Okay, so these are some of the responses. This isn't multiple choice. This is what they're saying. So what exactly are these kids being taught when they go off to university? If this is what's happening in the university, 75% or so walking away from the faith, what are they being taught? Well, the Institute for Jewish and Community Research did a study where they took this question head on. It's a very thorough study. In fact, this institute thought that there was actually a bias against the Jewish students, okay, and against the Jewish religion. And that's why they put out this study. But what they found was very interesting. It wasn't the Jewish students and the Jewish religion primarily. It was Christians. This is what they found in their study. They surveyed 1,200 college faculty members, and they found that 1 in 4 professors, that's 25% of professors, were either agnostic or atheist. Now that should be alarming, okay? Because in the general population, the number of atheists and agnostics, atheist says there is no God, and agnostic says, I don't know if there's a God, or you can't know if there's a God. That's only 4 to 5% in the general population. 4 to 5%. You go to the university, it's 25%. 1 in 4 professors is what they found, okay? So, I mean, I was taught by probably 10 to 20 professors when I went through university, maybe more. And so 25% atheist or agnostic. This is even more alarming. In addition, only 6% of university professors said the Bible is the actual word of God. 6%. Instead, 51% said the Bible is an ancient book of fables, legends, history, and moral precepts. More than half of the professors surveyed, more than half, over 600, checked the box for unfavorable feelings towards evangelical Christians. Imagine you were given the option, favorable, unfavorable, no feeling. You check unfavorable. This is alarming, folks. Their conclusion was that once Christian students get to college, they're likely to encounter professors who are aggressively opposed to Christianity and Christian values. Okay? So that was their study. Now, in a very old book called Humanism, what was it called? Humanism, A New Religion, Charles Francis Potter said this. He said it best. This is pretty good. He said, Education is thus the most powerful ally of humanism. Humanism is basically beliefs and values that are based on the idea that humans are basically good. We can solve our own problems. We don't need God or religion or anything like that, okay? So education is the most powerful ally of humanism. And every American public school, and I would say Canadian public school, is a school of humanism. And this is what he says, what can a theistic Sunday schools meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teaching, right? That's what we're up against. You send your kid, and most Christian students go to at least public school and then secular university college, okay? It's a minority that end up going to a Christian college like Tyndale or something like that. All right. So here's the question. Here's the question for all of us. And I think Tyndale's great, by the way. Here's the question. what are we doing to prepare our young people for secular university? What are we doing? I mean, are we doing anything? While you're thinking about that question, consider this. The secular university is an incredibly hostile place for Christians. I know, I went to numerous secular education institutes. You need to know that some professors make it their goal in life to deconvert your child, our youth. Let there be no confusion. We're sending them out, our children, our youth, our students, to a battleground. And the worst thing is we're sending them out completely unarmed, okay, in most cases. Now, why are we losing our youth? Well, there are many reasons, okay? And don't think, this guy's the apologist, so he's just going to give that response. I'm going to give you what I think. I'm going to tell you what I think. But it's multifaceted. I'm sure there's numerous things involved, okay? So it's not the only reason. But listen to what Stephen Meyer says. Stephen Meyer, he did a series for Focus on the Family called True You, okay? And it did a whole series on God's existence and then on the Bible being reliable. And in this one series, he said this, and this jumped out at me. He said, the heart cannot rejoice in what the mind rejects. The heart cannot rejoice in what the mind rejects. If our young people are told that the Bible is unreliable, that miracles are impossible, that God does not exist, that God is an invention of our own psychology, God didn't create you, you created God. That's what you're going to learn in a psychology class, or at least most of them. Jesus never existed. You hear things like this, and the list just goes on and on and on. How can we expect them, our young people, to continue to love and praise a being that they no longer believe exists? Okay? The heart cannot rejoice in what the mind rejects. Now, lest anyone think I'm being too simplistic, I fully realize that people aren't only walking away from the faith, Christianity, for intellectual reasons. But listen to this. Many people do walk away because of personal autonomy. They don't want to obey a God who puts demands on their lives. They want to follow worldly pleasures. They want to do drugs or drink or have sex with their boyfriend or girlfriend. They don't want to submit to the lordship of Christ. That's true. That's true. And as a result, they might walk away for self-indulgent reasons, self-indulgent motives. But notice that even self-indulgent motives rely on underlining intellectual doubt and skepticism. What do I mean? Check this out. And this is what I've been thinking about a lot lately. Part of my thesis is that the person who wants to live for themselves, personal autonomy, however you characterize that, must change their worldview to match their life, okay? So, for instance, imagine an 18-year-old boy. 18-year-old boy goes to college or university. He meets a girl. He wants to start sleeping with her, okay? He wants to have sex with her, but he knows it's wrong. He was raised in the church. Maybe he went to Cedarview, and Don says, abstinence before marriage, fidelity within marriage, right? So he knows it's wrong. In fact, he knows God prohibits sex before marriage. Now, he's living with this tension. There's a tension now where he desires to have sex with his girlfriend, but he knows it's wrong. Sex is prohibited before marriage. So rather than stop his behavior and curb his desires, he chooses not to believe in a God who doesn't want him to have sex with his girlfriend. God just wants him to be happy. You see, he changes his worldview to justify his behavior. Everybody does this, okay? Everybody does this because you can't live in that tension. So sex before marriage, well, you got to change your worldview, right? So here's the tension between the two. All right. So that's just an example. And you know what? You know the response. If you listen to someone who's deconverted, have you ever spoken to someone who used to be a Christian, they deconvert? The one thing they'll say, almost all of them will say, is that it was liberating. When they became an atheist or a skeptic or whatever, they'll tell you that it was liberating. Now let me show you, because there was this tension between what they wanted to do and what their worldview would allow, what they knew was true. So they changed what they know. Watch this. There was a young lady. Her name is Rachel Slick, okay? She's the daughter of a famous Christian apologist. In an article called, you should look it up, it's called The Atheist Daughter of a Notable Christian Apologist Shares Her Story. She says this. This is a long quote. I actually have quite a bit about her in here, and I just want you guys to listen. Someone once asked me if I would trade my childhood for another if I had the chance, and my answer was no, not for anything. My reason is that without my childhood, I wouldn't understand what freedom truly is. Freedom from a life centered around obedience and submission, freedom to think anything, freedom from guilt and shame, freedom from the perpetual heavy obligation to keep every thought pure. Nothing I've ever encountered in my life has been so breathtakingly beautiful. She says this, freedom is my God now, and I love this one 1,000 times more than I ever loved the last one. Now, Rachel Slick, in her article, she cites the reason why she deconverted. And I want you to listen to this, okay? Just listen to her words. She says, the article, she just finished talking about how certain her faith was, and then she writes this. This all changed one day during a conversation with my friend Alex. I had the habit of bouncing theological questions off him, and one particular day, I asked him this. If God was absolutely moral, because morality was absolute, and if the nature of right and wrong surpassed space, time, and existence, and if it was as much a fundamental property of reality as math, then why were some things a sin in the Old Testament, but not a sin in the New Testament? So she raises a question, intellectual doubt, skepticism. She says, Alex had no answer. Here we go. Alex had no answer. And I realized I didn't either. Everyone had always explained the problem away using the principle that Jesus' sacrifice meant we wouldn't have to follow those ancient laws. But that wasn't an answer, she says. This is what she says. In fact, by the nature of the problem, there was no possible answer that would align with Christianity. So she raised a question. She can't think of the answer. I think there is an answer, by the way. She can't answer it. And so now she's justified. In fact, in the same article, you read it, she goes into talking about how she felt guilty about having sex with her boyfriend while she was a Christian. And then all of this took place, and she still felt guilty for some time, and now she doesn't anymore. It goes on. Listen to this. I still remember sitting there in my dorm room bunk bed, staring at the cheap plywood desk and feeling something horrible shift inside me. A vast chasm opening up beneath my identity, and I could only sit there and watch it fall away into darkness. The Bible was not infallible, logic whispered from the depths. I had no defense against it. I had no defense against it. If it's not infallible, we've been basing our life's beliefs on the oral traditions of the Middle Eastern tribe. The Bible lied to you. Everything I was, everything I knew, the structure of my reality, my society, my sense of self suddenly crumbled away and I was left naked. She says, I was no longer a Christian. That thought was like a punch to the gut, a wave of nausea and terror. Who was I now when all this had gone away? What did I know? What did I have to cling to? Where was my comfort? I didn't know it, but I was free. I mean, that doesn't sound like freedom, what she just described there. But she calls it freedom, right? There's this tension, and now she's completely disengaged from the worldview, and now she's free, okay? So what's the church's responsibility? What's the church to do? I mean, is this really our problem? I mean, it's those kids, right? They're going off to university. They're the ones doing their thing. Does this really concern us? Well, cold case detective and apologist J. Warner Wallace, he says this. He used to be a youth group leader for some time before he became essentially an apologist now, full-time. If your students leave the faith because they want to pursue selfish desires related to sex, drugs, and drinking, that's on them. That's what he says. I was an atheist until I was at age 35. I know what it's like to chase after that stuff. I get it. But if your students walk away from Christianity because they don't believe it's factually true, that's on me. And that's on you guys, and that's on me as well. Okay? It's my responsibility, it's our responsibility to prepare them with the truth in a way they can understand and then defend for themselves. That's our job. All of our jobs. As a church, it's our job to raise the intellectual price tag for rejecting Christianity. If you want to reject God, you're welcome to it, but you can't do it rationally. Okay? You cannot do it rationally. You can reject rationality altogether and say there's no God, but you can't live in the world God's made, okay? You can't come to me and say there is no God, because rationally speaking, there is a God, and there's good arguments for God. Raising the intellectual price tag is what we have to do. And what I mean by that is that we all need to become apologists, okay? You don't all have to fly around the world speaking at conferences. You don't have to get up and teach a Sunday school in apologetics, but you got to be able to defend the faith, because that's what the Bible commands, okay? Everyone's called to be an apologist. It's not just my thing, it's all of our thing, okay? 1 Peter 3:15 says, we all know this, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give you the reason for the hope that you have, and do so with gentleness and respect. But that's not the only verse. There's many verses. Paul says, the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but they have divine powers to destroy strongholds. Well, what are the strongholds? He says, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. That's what we do. Jude, verse 3 says, Beloved, although I was eager to write to you about our common salvation, that's what he wanted to write about, I found it necessary to write appealing to you to contend for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. We're contending for the faith now. And of course, what's the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. With all your mind. So how do we help students do that? How do we help them love God with all their minds? Well, J. Warner Wallace, he says that we need to stop teaching our young people and start training our young people. And I agree. What's the difference? Training is teaching in preparation for a battle. Training is teaching in preparation for a battle. It's teaching with a vital reason, okay? How many of you guys like UFC? Probably not many. But listen, consider a UFC. You guys all know what UFC is, right? They're in a cage and two guys kick the snot out of each other. But think of a UFC fighter before a big fight, okay? As soon as the fight is scheduled, he begins to train. He begins to train exhaustively. He spends hours in the ring practicing holds. He may spend days mastering his kicks, hours on a speed bag that doesn't punch back, right? And so on. He'll spend hours meticulously studying his future opponent, his moves, his fighting style. He eats, breathes, and sleeps for the upcoming battle. He does all this because, why does he do it? Because one day, he's going to step into a ring with this person. He's going to be face to face with an aggressive opponent. And the only way you walk out of there alive is if you are trained, right? Now consider a typical youth group. I'm not talking about our youth group. I'm just talking about typical youth groups, okay? On a Friday night or a Sunday school lesson. You put yourself in the place of one of our youth, okay? Everyone passes, whether you listen or not. You don't need to worry about unit tests. You don't worry about pop quizzes or final exams. There's no assignments. In fact, there's none of that to worry about. No one expects you to study. I mean, why would you? Take it from me. I'm a high school teacher, okay? And if I'm going to start a new math lesson, something the kids haven't seen before, you know what the first question I get is when I start writing the date on the board? Yeah, is this going to be on the test? Now, if you're a good teacher, you just say yes. And you don't care if it's on there or not, okay? Because if I say no, it's not going to be on the test. You know what happens? Everybody starts packing up their stuff. and the phones come out, and that's not, so listen, but that's what's going on. In our youth groups, there are no tests. I mean, you can listen, you can not listen, and it's just a good time, right? And so let's be clear. The problem is not that we don't have excellent teachers in the church. It's my experience that there are tons of excellent teachers. The problem is that most of these teachers are not training for a battle, okay? But the battle's real, and most of our youth are completely caught off guard when the fight shows up at their doorstep. I taught at People's Christian Academy for 3 years, and to this day, I still get emails from students who will email me and say, Mr. Barnett, I'm in this class, and one of my friends is an atheist, and he wants to know a good argument for God's existence. And I remember sitting in chapel, and I know you're up there going on about something, right? Or a friend of mine is, they're thinking about having an abortion. This actually happened. Thinking about having an abortion. And I really want to give them some good arguments for the pro-life position. And I know you did a whole series on that in chapel. What were you up there talking about? Because most of the time, our youth are they're sitting there, but they're not listening because it's not relevant to them at that moment. But when a fight is scheduled, you better believe that they're paying attention. You better believe they're paying attention. Well, how do we proceed from here? Should we really be scheduling battles? Absolutely. One of the things we should be doing is taking our youth group. I mean, this is just a suggestion, and I know guys are doing it. In fact, I'm going to a conference. I leave tomorrow in California, and the guys who invited me, what they do is they take youth groups to Berkeley, the University of Berkeley. Okay? This is high school students at the University of Berkeley, and the students share with the students about God. They'll hand out tracts, they'll hand out questionnaires, and get into theological conversations. They're also doing mission trips now to university in Utah, okay? That's they're going to where the Mormons are. You better believe that your youth group is going to know the difference between Christianity and Mormonism if they're going to go to Utah and witness to Mormons, right? I bet you, well, I don't want to say this, but if you went to just a typical youth group and you ask them, what's the difference between a Mormon and a Christian? Half of them wouldn't have a clue what the difference is, okay? There's the difference. There's a battle schedule. This is what we need to be doing, I think. I would gladly take our youth with Chad and whoever else wants to come to York University, okay? And let's get our kids beat up a little bit. So they know, I mean, it's controlled, so they know what it's like in a couple of years when they're there on their own, not with their youth leader, okay? That's what we should be doing. Not mixed martial arts, we should be doing mixed martial apologetics. This is MMA. This is the real deal. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to beat you guys up. That may sound strange, but we're going to have a break, and then one of the things I've been doing is I've been role-playing an atheist and going into youth groups, and they think I'm an atheist professor from York University, believe it or not. They have no clue that this guy is a part-time pastor at Cedarview Community Church and is a part-time apologist. And so I go in and I give them arguments. Not arguments I made up, arguments that the atheists are actually using. Open Richard Dawkins' God Delusion. You'll find arguments I'm going to give you. Go on YouTube and you'll find arguments that I'm going to give you. Okay? So we're going to take a little break. Then I'll do about 20 minutes of beating you guys up. And then I want to see how you guys would respond to some of those challenges. And I'll answer all the challenges, but I kind of want to see what you guys think of some of those. Are they good? Are they bad? I don't think any of them are good. And so let's do a 5-minute break. All right? Sound good? All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to role play an atheist. I'll just give you about 20 minutes of this. I want to make sure I have enough time to answer the objections. I don't want to leave you guys hanging, and I want to be able to talk about them a little bit. Normally I, put on the coat, I got the glasses or whatever, and kind of look the part. But right now, you guys already know who I am, so who am I fooling, right? But here's what I would say, okay? Here's what I would say if I was in character. I'd say, besides being a philosophy professor, I'm a pretty ordinary guy. I'm a huge Toronto Maple Leafs fan. I have an incredible family. You can see my beautiful wife and incredible daughters, Juliana and Jocelyn. The main difference between you and I is that I'm also an atheist. Now, I'm sure many of you are Christians, and that's fine. But maybe some of you are even fundamentalist Christians. You know, you believe that God inspired every jot and tittle of the Bible. I think I know where you're coming from because I actually used to be a Christian and lost my faith when I became a free thinker, okay? Or an atheist, although I don't like the term atheist. I hate when people call me an atheist. Here's why. For me, atheism is not, it's a default position. Okay? It's not really a belief at all. Quite literally, it's a lack of belief. Often Christians or theists will demand that atheists provide evidence for their atheism. But that doesn't make any sense to me. For example, do we demand evidence from people who lack belief in Santa Claus? I mean, technically, you are all a-Santaists. But I'm sure no one's ever labeled you with that term. I imagine none of you believe in the thunder god Thor, although you might like his movies. But no one's probably ever called you an atheist, right? Everybody agrees that atheists and a-Santaists don't need to prove that Thor and Santa don't exist. The burden of proof is on the person who claims that Thor and Santa do exist. Likewise, it's up to the theist to prove that God exists. It's not the atheist's responsibility to prove that he doesn't. So atheism is better described as simply lacking belief. It's not even really a belief. Even though I'm an atheist, I'm not that much different than you. In fact, you are all actually atheists when it comes to 99.99999% of all the gods out there. Hindus believe in millions of gods, and I presume that you don't believe in any of them. You don't believe in Ra or Thor or Zeus? Well, I don't either. I just believe in one less God than you. I just add Yahweh or Jesus or whoever you call him to the list. When people ask me why I'm an atheist, I just turn around and ask them, why don't you believe in the ancient Egyptian sun god Ra? The usual response is, well, there's no evidence for the ancient Egyptian sun god Ra. Well, this is the exact same reason I don't believe in Yahweh or Jehovah or whatever you personally call him or her. Now, how many of you were raised in a Christian home? You guys can answer that question. How many? Yeah, most of you. Think about this for a moment. If you were born in India, well, you'd probably be a Hindu because 80% of the people born in India are Hindu. If you were born in Iraq, well, you would almost certainly be a Muslim and worship Allah instead of Jesus because 97% of those born in Iraq are Muslim. But no, most of you are probably born in Canada, and about 67% of those born in Canada are Christian. I know that number is going down and down and down each year. Listen, most people believe in God because of where they were born, an accident of geography. But let me give you some reasons why I'm not a Christian. That's why I don't believe in God. Here's why I'm not a Christian. Consider the Trinity. The Trinity is the most fundamental doctrine in Christianity, and yet at its very core, there seems to be a logical contradiction. I was at the grocery store the other day, and I noticed the following sign in a tabloid magazine. It said, "Woman gives birth to her own biological father." Now, does anyone have to check that claim out to know it's completely false? No, you don't got to investigate it. It's obviously false. It's contradictory. It's logically incoherent. If I said that there is a married bachelor just down the hallway in the church there, would anyone have to go search out this married bachelor? No, because married bachelors don't exist, okay? Or if I said there's a square circle in my car, do you guys want to see the square circle? No, you wouldn't have to check it out because they don't exist. They're logically contradictory. But listen to this. Likewise, the Christian concept of God is logically incoherent. Christians believe that three beings are one being, that three gods, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, are one God. You don't need a PhD in math to know that three is not one, okay? So when Christians say that God is three and one at the same time, it sounds to me like Christians are saying they believe in square circles, married bachelors. But we don't just stop at the Trinity. Look at the incarnation. The incarnation just means that Christ became incarnate. He took on flesh, okay? Christians teach that God became a man. Think about this for a second. Christians believe that Jesus is 100% man and 100% God. Now, the first problem is the percentages don't really add up, do they? However, if Jesus is 100% God, then wouldn't he be omniscient? And yet, speaking of his return, he says, but of the day or the hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, referring to himself, but only the Father. So is he omniscient or isn't he omniscient? You can't be omniscient and not omniscient at the same time, can you? That sounds contradictory. Is Jesus limited in space as a man, or is he omnipresent? Is he everywhere? Is he able to sin or is he unable to sin? We know God cannot sin, but was he able to sin as a man? Jesus had a body, but when you read the scriptures, God is spirit. This seems to be like saying 100% God and 100% man. Sounds like you're saying Jesus is 100% square and 100% circle. Sounds like a logical contradiction to me, okay? But don't even worry about that, because it turns out that the evidence for Christianity, there's a good evidence that Christianity is just a copycat religion. Did you guys know that? That Christianity is just, Jesus is just a recycled redeemer? Have you guys seen the Zeitgeist movie? How many of you have seen the Zeitgeist movie? None of you? Oh, a couple of you? The Zeitgeist movie has gone viral on the internet. I encourage you to go watch the first 15 minutes. I'd play it for you. Let me just read the script to you. This is what it says. This is the script. Horus was born on December 25th to the Virgin Isis, Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, which, in turn, three kings followed to locate and adorn the newborn Savior. At age 12, he was a prodigal child teacher. At age 30, he was baptized by a figure known as Adip, and thus began his ministry. Horus had 12 disciples who traveled about with performing miracles, such as healing the sick and walking on water. Horus, this is 3000 BC, Horus was known by many gestural names as the Truth, the Light, God's anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and many others. After being betrayed by Typhon, Horus was crucified, buried for 3 days, and thus resurrected. That's straight from the movie. But what about the Bible? What about the Bible? Can we trust the Bible? I mean, when I was a Christian, I used to believe it was infallible, it was inerrant, and that basically comes from my belief in inspiration, and that's what the Bible teaches. 2 Timothy 3:16 says, all Scripture is breathed out by God. And 2 Peter 1:21 says, no prophecy was ever produced by the will of man. I mean, this is God's word, right? I used to believe that too. And then people started pointing out contradictions to me. Like if you carry your King James Version, listen to this. In the Bible, there's actually multiple accounts of certain things. For example, you read the Gospels, you'll see multiple accounts of the resurrection, or the crucifixion and resurrection stories. But listen to this. In 2 Kings 8:26, it says, 2 and 20 years old was Ahaziah. Okay, that's 22. When he began his reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Athaliah, the daughter of Omri, king of Israel. 2 Chronicles 22:2 records the exact same story, but says this, 40 and 2, that's 42, years old was Ahaziah when he began his reign, and he reigned for 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Athaliah, the daughter of Omri. I mean, if you got a King James Version, just open it up and you'll see that. So 22 or 42? Well, it depends which account you read. What about 1 Kings 4:26 says Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses with for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. But 2 Chronicles 9:25 says, now Solomon had 4,000 stalls of horses and chariots and 12,000 horsemen. So is it 40,000 or 4,000? That seems like an error in the Bible, which is supposed to be inerrant. But let's go on from there. What about the problem of evil? This is probably the most persuasive argument that is leveled against God and the Christian God. Here's how it goes. It goes like this. If God is all good, because that's what Christians claim, he's all good, then he would want to prevent all the evil in the world. If God is all powerful, and that's what Christians claim, he's omnipotent, all powerful, then he could prevent all the evil in the world. There is evil in the world, therefore either God is not all good or he's not all powerful. Either way, he's not the God of Christianity. Okay? All right, how's everyone feeling? Because I'm no longer an atheist now. These are the arguments that you will hear. These are the most common arguments. Okay, there are more, by the way, but these are like, I'll watch a debate and this stuff comes up. This is what this is PhD philosophers are giving these arguments to an auditorium filled with 1,000, 2,000 people. Okay? These are the arguments you read in Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. These are the arguments that professors at secular universities are giving. We were having a conversation before this, and I was mentioning I was listening to a radio show, a call-in radio show, and it's kind of about apologetics issues. A student, second-year student, called in, and he said, "My professor, I'm in a Roman history class, and he just spent the first part of the lecture series talking about how the Bible was put together. The Old Testament was all put together at the Babylonian captivity. All of it. So all this stuff made up about Moses and Abraham, that was all this propaganda made up at the Babylonian captivity. And then in the syllabus, he was worried because in the syllabus it said, next we're going to talk about Horus and Mithras and all these Greek gods, and then they got Jesus on the end. And you guess where that's going. He's going to spend the rest of his lecture series talking about how Jesus is just a copycat redeemer, okay? So this is the stuff that you're going to see, and it's foolishness. It's absolute foolishness. So we're going to take on some of these. I wanted to finish with this. So the role play's over. Just how are you guys feeling? How are you feeling? Not good, right? You're going to feel a lot better in a second. Hopefully I didn't deconvert anyone. But I want you guys to feel uncomfortable because this is how your sons and daughters are going to feel when they go off to university, okay? Some of them are staying in residence. They may not feel like they can turn to you. You know, their professor's saying something. Can I talk to my mom and dad? Are they going to have answers? So you should feel a little uncomfortable because your students are going to feel that discomfort as well. I hope you just got a taste of what it's like to face these kinds of challenges. I mean, watching a movie like God's Not Dead, which I think is a good movie for kind of getting a feel for this, but this is I think this is even better to experience this kind of thing. The church will never begin to address the growing problems of our young people walking away from the faith if they don't start to address the challenges facing our students. And these are some of the challenges, at least intellectual challenges, okay? So let's take on some of these. That first one I said, atheism is just lack of belief. What do you guys think of that? Is atheism just a lack of belief? In fact, twice I said atheism isn't even a belief. Absolutely. Absolutely. And yet Lawrence Krauss, he's got a PhD in astrophysics. He was in Australia debating William Lane Craig. On stage, televised the whole 9 yards, he says, I don't believe atheism. He said that. That is self-refuting because he does believe atheism. He was saying that atheism is not a belief that you have. And then William Lane Craig turned to him and said, do you believe that? Right? Do you believe that it's not a belief? Listen, theism proper is there is a God. Agnosticism says we don't know if there's a God, or you cannot know if there's a God. And then atheism says it's a belief that there is no God. Atheism is as much of a belief as theism, okay? So let's get that straight. Those are all beliefs. So someone tells you they don't believe anything, just ask them if they believe that. To say it's simply a lack of belief is to say you have no beliefs about it. Listen, if I was asked who's the best female polo player in Europe, I wouldn't know where to start. Why? Because I have no beliefs about the quality of women's polo in Europe. Okay? I truly lack a belief regarding that question. But listen, this is not the case with atheists. People don't write books about things they don't have any beliefs about, right? No one debates their non-beliefs. If they did, there would be absolutely nothing to talk about, just two people staring at each other. Okay, so that should be clear. So this lack of belief tactic, you know what they're doing? Shifting the burden of proof. That's what I tried to do. I was trying to say, you theists need to prove there's a God. I can just sit here and cross my arms. No, atheists have a burden of proof. They have to prove there is no God, and there are ways to do that. In fact, I tried to do that. I tried to show it's incoherent, the concept of God, at least the Christian God. So there are ways to show. The problem of evil tries to show there's no God, okay? So let's move on to the next one. This challenge, I believe in one less God. This is Richard Dawkins. I got this out of his book, okay? The God Delusion, sold over 1 million copies. What do we do with it? Well, what do you guys think? I believe in one less God. Let me just do this one because you're already looking at the pictures. Saying the theist is an atheist with respect to 99.99% of all the so-called gods out there is like claiming I'm single with respect to 99.999% of the women out there. I'm single with respect to like 3.5 billion females, okay? But that doesn't make me an atheist. In fact, that doesn't make me a single person. What makes me married is that I'm married to one woman, right? And so this whole idea, well, you're really an atheist too, and because you don't believe in any of those gods, I'm just adding one God to the mix, is just nonsense, okay? It's just nonsense. In fact, there's a much bigger problem here. The strategy they're trying to use, all of these arguments have a strategy that the atheist is trying to put forward, okay? What they're trying to do is they're trying to ignore all the evidence for the Christian God, okay? So what you do is you lump all gods together. So they'll say, well, you don't believe in Thor or Zeus or Ra or whoever. Yeah, either do I. I just add one more God. Like the evidence for all of these gods is equivalent. In fact, they've invented a god that they call the flying spaghetti monster. You guys heard of this? There's like T-shirts and all this stuff. I worship the flying spaghetti monster. They're comparing Yahweh, the God of the Bible, to something like an imaginary flying spaghetti monster. But here's the deal. Where's the evidence for a flying spaghetti monster? I'm going to save you some trouble. There is none, okay? Don't go looking. You want to know the evidence for a transcendent God that we find in the Bible? I could list off the cosmological argument. In fact, there's various forms of it. One's called the Kalam cosmological argument. Cosmological argument. The teleological argument, that's an argument from design. So design in the universe, design in biology. The moral argument. We're going to come back to this moral argument. The fact there's objective moral values and duties out there finds its stand in God. The ontological argument, experience. The fact that we have experienced God, we shouldn't downplay that. That's a good argument to use. Now, of course, they're going to say, well, that's just your experience. But at least it is something that verifies, so your religious experience, as well as contingency argument, the resurrection of Jesus. I did a whole talk in the main sanctuary on the resurrection. All of those things. There's good evidence for a transcendent God of the Bible. None for these other gods, okay? So don't let them try to conflate all the gods together. If they want to talk about Thor, let's talk about Thor. If you want to talk about Yahweh, well, then we're in a whole different ballgame. Now, this whole argument, this I've heard at numerous debates as well. If you were born here, you'd believe that. If you were born here, you guys know the problem with this kind of argument? What did you say? Absolutely. Well, that's a thing. I'm surprised there isn't someone here. No one was born in Iraq. Because if there was, you could say, well, I was born in Iraq and I'm a Christian. That's why I'm here. There are plenty of examples of people. It may be true that if you were born in Iraq, you'd most likely be a Muslim. That may be true. But that says nothing about the reasons for a belief. This actually is called the genetic fallacy, okay, in logic. Basically says, it basically says that the source of the belief, it tries to attribute truth to the source. But listen, I could believe because my parents told me that Christianity is true. That doesn't mean Christianity is true or not true, okay? How you figure out if Christianity is really true is if you look at the evidence, okay? So how I came to my belief, the source, has nothing to do with whether it's true or false, okay? In fact, there's a classic example, the benzene molecule, right? Is that what it is? It has a circular, in chemistry, it has like a circular kind of structure to it. The guy who came up with the molecule said he had a dream one day of a snake that was biting its tail, and that's how he came up with this molecule. Now, the source of it has nothing to do with the fact that the benzene molecule actually has this structure, even though it was kind of weird how he came up with it, okay? So that's called the genetic fallacy. There are good reasons to believe Christianity is true, okay? And there are good reasons to believe atheism isn't. And by the way, if we could easily say, well, you're an atheist. Are your parents atheists? You're an atheist because you were raised in an atheist home. I mean, the argument goes both ways, right? So you can blame their beliefs on where they were born. It doesn't get you anywhere. What about this stuff about the Trinity and the incarnation? We need to understand the Trinity, and I taught some of this material, right, in the main sanctuary when we talked about Jesus. Maybe not on the Trinity, though. The Trinity stems from the understanding of the Bible. You're not going to find the word Trinity in the Bible. You talk to Muslims, and they love talking about this. Well, show me where it says Trinity in the Bible, right? Like that's a good argument. The Trinity's in there, but you have to do a little bit of work, okay? You see Jesus as God, you see the Father's God, you see the Holy Spirit's God, but you see that they're also different persons. And that's really the kicker. It's not that one being is three beings. It's that one God is three persons. That's classical Christianity. This is what the church fathers nailed down years ago. It's three persons, one God. So there is no contradiction. It may be mysterious, but it's not a contradiction, okay? And so a proper understanding, it's like this. Think of a triangle. One triangle has three corners. The analogy is not great, but you can kind of get the sense, right? One triangle with three distinct corners. And there's some bad analogies out there. We use them all the time, but something like water, it can be ice, it can be liquid, it can be vapor. That's actually called modalism, which is a church heresy, by the way. So we shouldn't teach that because it shows that, well, you can have water, but then if you freeze it, it's all ice. And if you heat it, well, it's all water vapor. So it's never all three at the same time, right? At least at one temperature. And so, no analogy is good for the Trinity. Just know that, okay? No analogy is good. What about the incarnation? It's also not a logical contradiction. Now, we talked about this a little bit. I said 100% God and 100% man. Don't ever use that kind of language. He's truly God and truly man. That's what we believe. It gets a little bit more complicated because you've got to start talking about the natures of God. Jesus has two natures, okay? A divine nature and a human nature, okay? And that's what the incarnation is. The Son is like the tangent point kind of on that line, I don't know if you guys, right here, that's Jesus. He has two natures. Okay, where the Trinity is three persons, one what, one God, and three whos. Jesus is one who, one person, and two whats, two natures. Okay? If that just, did that, what? One what, three whos, but this is two who, one who, two whats. I don't know. Yeah. Think about it. Think about it. So to answer questions like, could Jesus sin? This is debated among evangelicals. Could Jesus sin? You could ask it of both natures. Could he sin in his human nature? Some say, yeah, absolutely. He's just human as us. But in his divine nature, he couldn't sin. Okay? And so he could not sin in his divine nature. In his human nature, he could, but he didn't. He resisted temptation, did not sin. Okay? Again, there's a lot of mystery around the incarnation. We're not going to cover it in one slide in 3 minutes. But just know it's not a contradiction. But this is what especially Muslims, you watch any debate, you talk to any Muslims, and they think you believe a logical contradiction, okay? Just know that. Okay, about the Horus thing. I can't believe you guys haven't seen Zeitgeist, because this is what is going viral, or at least did go viral. When I was at teachers college, an atheist in my class, and most people weren't Christians, but this guy was like overtly atheist. He was handing out burned copies of Zeitgeist, handing them out. This is how I came across this clip that we didn't watch, but I read the script to you. Listen, there's a huge problem with just the first line. Horus was born on December 25th. Just like who? Jesus? Whoever came up with this video and whoever's propagating this idea doesn't even have a clue what Christians believe, because no one thinks Jesus was born, at least no historian thinks Jesus was born on December 25th. That's when we celebrate it. Jesus was not born on December 25th, okay? And then you go down from there. Virgin Isis wasn't called Mary, wasn't a virgin. This is just made up stuff. 12 disciples, where is this coming from? You look at the primary source documents and none of this is true. But when you put it in a YouTube video, oh man, you better believe a lot of people are going to believe it, okay? Because there's no response. And so just know that no serious scholar believes any of this garbage, okay? That's what it is, it's garbage. Even if it wasn't all garbage, just so you know, all of our records from these mythologies come after Jesus. All of our records, even though they say this dates back to 3000 BC, the earliest record we have come after Jesus. So if anything, why wouldn't we assume they just were made up and copied the resurrection story? Okay? That's good to keep in mind as well. The last thing is, just because there's similarities. I'm not saying there are any similarities, because there aren't. But if there were similarities, it wouldn't mean Jesus' story was copied. Have you guys heard of the story, this book called Futility, The Wreck of the Titan? This book tells a story about this. It's written by Morgan Robertson. It speaks of a large ship of the day called Titan. The ship was described as unsinkable. It hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage. It sank in mid-April. Despite thousands of passengers on board, there was not enough lifeboats. And so thousands of people were killed. What does that sound like? This book was written 14 years before the Titanic sank. 14 years. So just because there's similarities, now people are going to say, well, the Titanic is just a copied story, right? There was no Titanic. That's the logic, because this book was before that. No, this is foolishness, okay? Each thing has to be weighed on its own merits. And we have plenty of historical evidence for a historical Jesus who lived, performed miracles and exorcisms, and died, and then rose 3 days later, okay? That's where the evidence points. So all this mythology stuff is, what do I call it, garbage? That's a good word. What about this, the stalls and the how old was he? If you carry an ESV, you won't find the contradiction, okay? Some manuscripts, the ones that used the 1611 King James Version used, had these discrepancies. These are copying mistakes. In fact, when you look at the Hebrew, for 40,000 and 4,000, you look at the Hebrew, it's very, very similar. Kind of like how you just add a zero, okay? Because and that's true too. Some have argued if you have 4,000, you have 40,000. And some have also argued at the beginning he had 4,000, and then by the end he had 40,000. And that's true, but it could just be in the manuscripts they were using a copying mistake. And in fact, your ESV will say as much. It says some manuscripts put 4,000, and we recognize that as a variant. Remember we talked about variants? Same with now Ahaziah. This one's tough to get around. 22 talks about the year, reigned for 1 year. He was 22. Here's how we know he was 42. Sorry, we know he was. Ahaziah could not have been 42 at the time, because when Ahaziah took over for his father had died, and that's why he took over. His father was 40 when he died. You can't be older than your father. That's what I'm told anyways. So 20, it's got to be 22. It can't be 42, or he's older than his father. Okay? And just remember, we believe in the inspiration of the autographs. That's the originals, not the manuscripts. Those are the human copies. Okay? Human beings copied them over time, and we talked about all that process. Okay? And so we can get back to the original, and I think we've done that. Finally, the problem of evil is, again, this is a very difficult challenge to answer. It's probably one of the most difficult because it's personal. A lot of people have experienced evil in their lives, okay? And so giving a philosophical argument in response is probably not even appropriate, okay, for most people. If you just have some atheist who's staying up, or a guy pretending to be an atheist standing in front of you and saying, here's my argument, yeah, the response I'm about to give is appropriate. But when you're talking with someone who just lost a family member to a terrible illness or some kind of tragedy, saying, well, here's an argument for you, might not be the best approach. Sometimes you just need a shoulder to cry on, okay, something like that. And so here's the response to this challenge. And I think it's been answered handedly, numerous ways, but here's just one response. The person who provides the argument I just gave, which is a deductive argument, and if all the premises are true, the conclusion follows, there is no God. But the problem with his argument is, this person assumes that there's evil in the world. Let me just go back. See the third premise? There is evil in the world. That's huge. That is huge, because if someone believes that there's evil in the world, then they must believe in God. And let me show you why. If there's evil in the world, they're saying that, then they're assuming evil exists. And I'm not talking about personal preference, like ice cream here. It's not like, I just really don't like that. When people say that ISIS, those people are evil, who are killing innocent people, and the different terrorist groups, or Osama bin Laden, I got Hitler up there, I got the Sadie Hook shooter, the guy who killed elementary school students, 20 of them, with teachers. This is real evil. This is not me saying, I really didn't like that. That was just my personal opinion. No, that is as evil as it gets. If that's true, then there's an objective standard of evil that's outside of me and outside of you. All of us get together and say, yeah, Hitler's evil, right? There could be another group of people that say, no, Hitler's all good. How do you decide who's right? Is it just whoever has the bigger group? Whoever has the manpower to enforce their beliefs? No. There is a standard outside of every individual and every culture, every group. And that standard, well, what could it be? That puts obligations on our lives. The only objective standard is God. God. Therefore, God must exist. God's the one saying that's evil. It's his standard. And that's why I'm obliged to not murder and to do good. Because there's a person, God, out there putting those moral obligations on us, okay? So I believe that if you think evil exists, then you're almost there to believing God exists, okay? Unless you want to say that what these guys did was just your own personal dislike, then I think you need, not a philosophical argument, you need psychological help. That's just the reality. You need help. And so those are the answers. I think I got them all. I think we got them all, right?